Hello, welcome to our Halion 6 tutorial series. Today we're talking about granular synthesis, and in order to do any work with granular synthesis we need a granular synthesizer. So if we create a zone of the granular zone type, granular zones are sample based. We're not going to hear any sound placed on the keyboard. There's no sound until we've got a sample in there. So let's load one in. Sample. So that's what we're going to use. Okay. Drag that in. Get rid of that. So here is our sample. And if I play it, we don't hear it. It's there. But when I press a key, we just get this kind of nasal, static, fairly unpleasant source kind of sound. Let's try to find out why. So go into the zone, hit your show grain oscillator section button, and this is our granular editor. By default, when Halion loads a sample into its grain oscillator, we don't have any forward motion. What does that mean? Well, imagine a granular oscillator as taking lots and lots of tiny segments of the sample and playing each segment individually. And as soon as one segment, I'm going to call them grains from this point onwards because that's what a grain is, each time one grain has been played, a new grain starts playing immediately. So it joins all of these tiny grains together, and what you hear is the effect of all of these individually processed grains being played. But by default we have this direction value here at 0, which means it's just playing the beginning of the sample over and over again. So what we're hearing is it's actually the first 3.82 milliseconds of the sample being played over and over again. Why is it 3.82 milliseconds? Well, this is where things get a little bit esoteric, and the whole concept of granular synthesis is esoteric in its own right. Because this note's been mapped to C3, that informs the sampling rate. It's the wrong term to use, I shouldn't say that. The granular rate of the synthesis engine. So the frequency of C3 is 261 Hz. So it splits the grain up into that many segments and plays 3.82 milliseconds worth of sound, and then says, well, what's my current position? Well, if you're not moving forwards through the sample, the current position is always the start. So it plays another 3.82 milliseconds of sound. And then once that grain has finished, it plays another 3.82 milliseconds of sound. So it's going to do that 261 times in the first second. And what we get is this. So what you're hearing there isn't the tone of the sample. It's the tone generated by the waveform being repeated 261 times, and because the slice of time is so small, we're only playing less than 4 milliseconds worth of sound, that actually imposes its own tone on the sound. So what you're hearing there is a C3. It's just been constructed in a very odd form. I can prove this in a kind of roundabout way by setting the duration to 2. Well, what's happened now? We've halved the frequency of the samples of the number of grains that are going to be played in a second. Instead of playing 261 grains, we're now going to play 130 grains. What that's going to result in is a dropping in the pitch by an octave. This is going to sound an octave lower than the sound we just heard. There you go. So that sound there, I know it's very quiet, is 1 octave lower than this. And we can just about get away with going lower again. Let's keep going. Every time I double this number, we should be dropping an octave, but eventually it's going to stop working. Kind of not really working anymore at 16. definitely not working. 32. And we've completely lost our original tone, and now something else is happening. The idea is that we're playing such a big chunk of time, the actual frequency of the sample is now starting to shine through. And as I increase this duration knob, we hear more and more of the start of the sample. As the length of the individual grains gets bigger, it's having more opportunity to actually play the sound. So it's now spending 3.82 seconds playing its sound. 1, 2, 3, 4-ish. So that's the first concept we've got to get our head around, that if you have very, very small grains, the pitch that you hear is the pitch of the frequency of the grains, and if you have longer grains, the pitch that you hear is the pitch of the native sample itself. And there is a crossover point where you get those two things in competition and you get a kind of strobing effect. There's the tone, and now it's going to go up in pitch until finally we get to C3. It's now playing a pitch of C3 and not really caring what the sample is. Now, we didn't get into granular synthesis to just play the beginning of this sample over and over again. That's not what it's all about at all. So I'm going to set this to a pretty big number. And now we're going to start, can you see the grains constantly repeating themselves? This white line is the grains being spawned. We're going to start moving forwards in time. And now we'll very slowly track through the sample as played. The faster I increment this value, the faster forwards we move. Now, forward travel in Halion is a bit weird. I'm not sure why they've done it this way, but you've got basically two controls that set how you move through the sample. Speed is actually the playback speed, but without direction you don't have any speed. Imagine sat at the traffic lights gunning your engine. You know, you can press your accelerator as fast as you like, you're not going to go anywhere. Think of the direction knob as your clutch. You have to actually engage the engine and then you start moving forwards. Well, this engine has a reverse gear as well, because if we set direction at -50, if I move the start point of the sample forwards, so this is my position, this is where the playback is going to start, so I'll set it there. Now with negative numbers in direction, we go backwards. And now we'll go forwards again from this point. You get the idea. Now then, you can have 8 different playheads all firing simultaneously. So up until now, we've had one playhead, one granular engine that's been producing some sound. And it sounds kind of broken and stuttered. You can smooth a lot of that stuttering away by introducing more voices. So if we give it 4 voices instead, already got a lot smoother. So what the engine's doing under the hood is actually adjusting the phase of each of these waves so that they're interacting with each other. To paint a more accurate representation of the entire wave. And now at a 100% direction setting, which means we're playing back at regular speed, it sounds pretty much perfect. If I go back down to 1 again, we still get that stuttered effect. But even with just 2 voices, so those 2 sounds are played with opposite phase. Now that we've introduced more than one granular playhead, we can start messing with how those grains are actually, or where and how those grains are being produced. So if I generate a spread of position, it means, see that stroby line? Watch it widen as I increase this spread. And now each of the playback engines, the grain players, are choosing a different point in the sample at which to start their magic, and from that point onwards they all follow the same rules. I can randomize, if I just pull this down a little bit but increase randomization instead, then you're going to get a Now, position offset is all about the left and right channels. There are settings for surround sound to do with granular synthesis that I can't show you because we're in a stereo environment here. But if I start incrementing the offset value, and if you're listening in headphones, you'll be hearing all sorts of bouncing. I'm hearing different things in my left and right ear. The grains are basically being offset in a stereo field. You get some really lovely effects. That sounds great. Let's mess with the duration a little bit. We've got it static at more or less a factor of 40 here, which again, remember, that means it's basically spending about 120 milliseconds playing each grain before it goes on to the next one, because I'm always pressing C3, which is a 3.82 millisecond frequency rate, and then I multiply that by 40. But let's vary that. First of all, we'll spread it out, pull this down a bit, and then increase the randomization. So now we're getting different durations of grains being played, and it's starting to sound really quite lovely indeed. So at this point, everything that we've done until now has been on C3. What happens if we don't press C3? Let's press C4 instead. That goes to show you how significant the key, the played key, is in granular synthesis. It takes a lot of information from the actual key that gets played. And that's why right at the beginning I said it's more of a sound effect than a synth, because you get such a variance of sound over the keys that I find it difficult to wrap my head around the concept of using it as a playable synthesizer. Now, that's a sound that I could imagine doing interesting things with, but all of these keys are playing at different speeds. And at this point we kind of are into black magic, because remember that there are two different approaches that you can take to controlling pitch in granular synthesis. Very short duration grains, the dominant pitch comes from the granular synth itself, and at longer durations the pitch is taken from the sample, and the interaction of those two things basically gives us lots of kind of modulation flexibility. So So this is taking the primary pitch from the sample itself, because we're playing a long duration. Anything more than somewhere around 15, a multiplier of 15, you're going to lose the original pitch of the sound. It's not an exact science. Depends very much on the pitch of the key that you're actually playing. Again, offset is all about the stereo split, not the offset of the pitch interval. So I'm now getting different things happening in different ears. Ooh, got a really sweeping kind of wave crash sound going on there. That was quite nice. When I say nice. Ooh, there it is. Just around here it goes right into my right ear. When you get to the stage where you've kind of found yourself in a bit of a blind alley, it's like, oh, took a wrong turn, I didn't mean to get here. I've got this little preset set up in it, which basically just blanks everything back down to 0 again. There isn't actually a feature in Halion to do that. It takes moments. The first time you load a new zone up, if you've got all of your settings at 0, just click Save Preset, create yourself an init file. It'll bury that in your documents folder somewhere, and now you can always get back to ground zero if you need to. So we're right back to our very initial granular patch setting. So what follow zone pitch is all about is nothing to do with anything in the settings in this screen. It's actually outside Granular Synthesizer. So let's get a baseline. I'm going to play a C4 with follow zone pitch on, but I've made no meta changes to my zone itself. I get this. So we're listening to the duration of the grains. So we have a frequency underneath, but we've also got the modulation applied by the grain synthesizer. Let's increase the octave by 1. We're listening to those pulses in the background. We've obviously increased the pitch of the sound by an octave, and another octave. And so we're listening to two separate things. We're listening to the pitch, which at this point is pretty unpleasant, and also the effect of the granular engine underneath. Now turn follow zone pitch off. Go back to pitch. There's our C4. And the duration is no longer going to follow zone. Turn octave up. And again. Biddly, 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 biddly. The effect that's been generated by the granular synthesizer has been decoupled. It's the same period behind the scene, regardless of the fact that the tone of the sound has increased. It's a little bit difficult to get your head around the fact that there are two separate, pitch-oriented concepts in conflict with each other here. As with most things with granular synthesis, it's really a case of I can't overstress this. Just start twiddling knobs. It's basically an enormous randomization sandpit. Wind effect, that is. Coming out into some kind of tonal effect. Fabulous, fabulous fun. So length is all about how long each grain plays for. Now, don't get this confused with the propagation rate of the grains. Duration deals with that. So don't forget, as soon as one duration is over, another one begins. So these like blocks of time are always glued together, but inside each block of time, how long is the sample actually being played for? Well, that's the length. So if we've got, I'll just get back to my init, create some voices, create some direction, play a note. So as I pull length back, it's no longer playing every grain for its entire duration. If I put length very short and have quite a long duration, we're only getting tiny slices of time and lots of silence. We've still got 4 playheads doing the stroby thing, so it's kind of filling the gaps in. We get a really staccato and an interesting staggered sound. This is the level of each of the grains. We can randomize that so it'll get louder and quieter. And we have this RMS time, which basically is like an auto gain, and it's 100% with a pretty fast follow time, so it's recalculating it regularly. Plays every part of the sample as loud as it can over that averaged period of time. Different shapes of waves with which to draw the individual grains. And all of that is wrapped up in a sampler. So we have complete control over the sample itself, what our start and end points are, whether or not we have a loop, and any of the settings that you make in the sampler itself will be reflected. There's the green zone that I've just drawn for my loop point. And now can you see that it's chosen a new range of the sample to display? And now when we press our key, those values have been overridden and they're all visible here. And here we are in loop continuous. Get in there, have some fun. Hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, please consider subscribing and hit notifications to find out when the next episode's out. Hope to see you then.